I recently went on stream with my friend T-Dreads, and we overanalyzed the hell out of FNaF 6. I went into that stream thinking we'd be there for maybe 2 or 3 hours. You know, we'd go over a few things in the game that have already been talked about, maybe we'd get a few funny clips, you know, the usual. Instead, we were there for 7 hours. And a good chunk of that stream's runtime was dedicated to this monstrosity. This is Candy Cadet, an animatronic that you can buy in FNaF 6 that tells you 3 stories. There have been a lot of interpretations about what these stories could mean, but over the course of a couple of hours, me and TD came to a conclusion that I have never heard anyone bring up before. And not only is it by far one of the craziest theories I've ever heard, I actually think it explains a lot of things that we've never had a proper explanation for. Today, I'm going to tell you how one of Candy Cadet's stories not only proves that FNaF 2's DCI happened, but also completely changed our perspective on an animatronic that never fit in with its peers. Let's begin. As I said, this theory spawned from Candy Cadet, specifically the story about the kind man and the 5 orphans. Let's start off by listening to it in full.
Now I will tell you a story. A story about a kind man who would visit 5 orphans and bring them toys and gladness. The man lived alone, and lived in fear that someone might break into the house of one of the 5 children, so he adopted all 5, and brought them together in one place, in his own home. He promised them to never leave them, and they promised to always come home, and never stay out too late. He left one day to buy food, his heart being filled with gladness, but returned to find that the burglar had chosen his home, and killed all 5 of the children. The man could only afford one coffin, so he stitched the 5 bodies together to make one, and buried the child. That night, there was a knock at the door.
On first glance, we thought this story was pretty open and shut, actually. The kind man is almost certainly a stand-in for Henry, the caretaker that wants to protect the children. He even makes them promise to never stay out too late because of what happened to Charlie years prior. This would then make the burglar William. He sneaks in and kills all 5 children while nobody's watching. This all makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure that it's what everyone gravitated toward on their first listen to the story. So, what happens next? Well, not being able to afford a coffin for all 5 of the children, the kind man stitches all of their bodies together and stuffs them into one costume. Then, that very night, there's a knock at the door. There's a pretty clear implication with that. The coffin, whatever it actually was, came to life as an amalgamation of the dead children, and then returned to the place where they all died. Well, we know what that is too. That's very similar to the Fun Times. Dead children were turned into Remnant, mixed together and infused into the Funtime animatronics, who then came to life. So it's an open and shut case. The kind man, Henry Emily, brought in 5 children, but then a burglar, William Afton, snuck in and killed all of the children. Unable to get a proper coffin for all of them, Henry stitched all of them together and buried them all into one coffin, a Funtime animatronic. Then that night, the Funtime comes to life and returns to the place where they died. Wait, what? Something doesn't add up there. If this is the story that they're telling us, then it would mean that Henry Emily is the one who built the Fun Times, the one who mixed the souls of the MCI together and injected remnants into the machines. But that is impossible. Not only do we know that William built the Fun Times due to the fact that Afton Robotics is written on the blueprints for all of them in Sistia location, but Elizabeth Afton even says that baby was built for her, by her father. All signs point toward the fact that these animatronics were built by William Afton. And even if you wanted to try arguing that point, it wouldn't actually matter. Because even if Henry was the one who built these animatronics, he certainly wasn't the one creating and injecting remnants into them. That was, without a doubt, William's doing. So no matter which way you slice it, something about our understanding of the story is fundamentally wrong in its current state. So what are we wrong about? Well, the way I see it, there are only 2 possible answers. Either the kind man isn't Henry, or the creation at the end of the story isn't one of the Fun Times. And honestly, I don't think it's possible for anyone other than Henry to be the kind man. The only other adult who really interacts with children at all in this franchise at this point is William, and nothing about his character reads as a kind man who brings gladness to children. Not to mention, William's role is already taken in this story. He's the burglar who kills the children. We don't have another serial killer in this story. It's always been William, and as such, the role of the kind man can only be left to Henry. Well, if that's the case, then the misconception has to be in regards to the ending of the story. The kind man stitched together 5 dead kids, buried them in the same coffin, and then the coffin came to life. So, what else could this mean? I know what some of you are going to say, so let's get it out of the way now. There are people who think that this is referring to FNaF 6 as a whole, and that the 5 children being stitched together is a metaphor for all of the animatronics coming together in the FNaF 6 pizza place, and all being buried inside of it. While I do understand how people came to this conclusion, I don't think it checks out for quite a few reasons. First of all, we're specifically told that it was 5 children who were killed and stitched together. And in FNaF 6, only 4 animatronics were brought together by the end of the story. So from the jump, you have to start using technicalities to try and make this work. You could argue that the 5th animatronic is the puppet inside of Lefty, sure, but at that point you have to get into the technicality of Molten Freddy being made up of all the fun times barring Circus Baby. That number would be way higher than 5, so this explanation doesn't really make any sense. Not to mention, the timing of the story doesn't check out with FNaF 6 at all. In the story, the children are killed, the kind man stitches them together and buries them, and then he hears a knock on his door that night. It all happens very quickly, without any meaningful gaps of time between them. Meanwhile, FNaF 6 takes place multiple decades after any group of children are killed. I get why people latched onto this theory at first, I really do, but the more you think about it, the less sense that it actually makes. Speaking of groups of children, we need to talk about something. The 5 children that are killed in this story don't line up with the MCI that well. Not only does the MCI have the problem of potentially being more than 5 kids, but the way that they were killed doesn't line up with how it's told in this story. In the story, the kind man leaves for just a bit to buy food, and when he comes back, all 5 kids are dead. But with the MCI, they weren't all killed at the same time. They were killed separately, and only once in pairs. Also, the bodies were hidden, not left for the kind man to see as soon as he got home. The MCI doesn't actually fit this story at all. But you know what does? The DCI. FNaF 2's Dead Children incident. 5 kids being killed and left out in the open at the FNaF 2 location for anyone to come find, including the kind man himself, Henry Emily. The only problem that the community has ever had with the DCI is that we've struggled to really understand if it happened or if it was retconned. But with this revelation, and a few more that I make in this video, all of a sudden, we have a reason to believe that the DCI might have happened. In fact, we actually have a much more recent piece of evidence to suggest that the DCI might have happened. The week before. On night 5, by entering 1987 into the phone and then doing it backwards, Ralph ends up finding an edited version of the night 5 phone call from FNaF 2. Let's take a listen to what the original phone call sounded like.
Oh, hey, good job, night 5. Keep a close eye on things tonight, okay? From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, especially concerning any previous employees. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. A position just became available. We don't have a replacement for your shift yet, but we're working on it. We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years, though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down. So just get through one more night. Hang in there. Good night.
So evidently, something happened. And because of what ended up happening, the building went on lockdown and there was an attempt at contacting the owner of the original restaurant, who we know to be Henry Emily. As for what happened that night, well, all signs point toward it being the DCI. It's the only event that could warrant a response like this, which leads into the building going on lockdown the next day. The only other event from this era to think about is the Bite of 87, but most people agree that that happened on the final day shift, otherwise we probably would have heard about it in one of these phone calls. So, why do I bring all of this up? Well, like I said, there's an edited version of this phone call in the week before. And when I say that it was edited, I mean that 80% of it was completely cut out.
Hey, good job, night 5. Keep a close eye on things tonight, okay? We don't have a replacement for your shift yet, but we're working on it. So just get through one more night. Hang in there. Good night.
Everything that hinted toward the building going on lockdown and the attempt at contacting the original restaurant owner is completely missing from this recording. And Ralph noticed this himself, so we know that the original phone call existed. This isn't a retcon. This is Fazbear Entertainment's attempt at a cover-up. They're trying to bury the DCI entirely. It wouldn't make sense to do this for the Bite of 87 because everyone already knows about that, and it got real media coverage. But the DCI? That never leaked. No news outlet ever picked that up. And so to prevent that from ever happening, Fazbear Entertainment edited old recordings to remove anything that so much as hinted at it. So the only person that would be able to tell that something is off is the person who originally recorded that message in the first place. All of this is to say, the DCI is real. I know that not everyone doubts the existence of the DCI and thinks it's a retcon, but I know that at least some of you are on the fence about it, and some of you might be fully convinced that it didn't happen. But considering we have proof that Fazbear's deleting evidence, it tells us that something absolutely happened that night, and that something is almost certainly the DCI. But unfortunately, this is where me and TD hit a wall for a bit. While the revelation that the DCI is almost certainly real and that one of Candy Cadet's stories might be referencing it was interesting in its own right, it wasn't enough to prove anything on its own. After all, we suddenly had a new question to answer. What happened to the DCI kids? Well, if we plug them into the story, then after they were killed, Henry stitched them together, shoved them all into the same coffin, and they came to life. But we had nothing to go off of anymore. There were no more loose strands for us to pull, so for a while, we were pretty stumped. Confused and lacking direction, we continued our deep dive into FNaF 6, hoping an answer would come to us on its own. And that is when we found this. Lefty's blueprint. Lefty's always been a bit of an oddball, hasn't he? In a game where every other animatronic seems to have some significant lore relevance, Lefty is kinda just there. It kinda seems like his only purpose is in his name. He lured and encapsulated the puppet, then transported and extracted it at the FNaF 6 pizza place. The only thing we have left that might point us in some direction is, well, the only thing that's left in his name. The F. Fuse. Wait, fuse? As in, combining multiple things to one form? As in, exactly what the kind man did with the dead children at the end of the Candy Cadet story? And this is Lefty we're talking about, which, unlike the sister location animatronics, has Fazbear Entertainment on its blueprints. And Lefty has that weird out-of-place jaw that the rest of Henry's creations all have. So, what if this is the answer? What if the coffin that Henry made for those 5 dead children was actually Lefty? This thought led us down an insane rabbit hole. And as we started to go deeper and deeper, everything started to make a weird amount of sense. But first, a lot of you are probably having the same thought. Lefty wasn't around at that point in the story. He was only built around the time of FNaF 6 so that he could capture the puppet. While it's true that Lefty did go on to capture the puppet before the events of the game, that doesn't entirely mean that the animatronic was built specifically for that. If you ask me, Lefty was built around the same time as the rest of the rock stars. So, when was that? Well, we know that it wasn't around the time of FNaF 6. It was actually much earlier. In the office you're in for the closing shift, you can see a child's drawing of Lefty on the wall, as well as one with the rest of the Rockstar animatronics. And these are there from the very start of the game, before you even get a chance to purchase these animatronics. How can children be drawing these animatronics if they've never even been on stage before? For the sake of transparency, it's worth noting that there's cut content from Special Delivery that tells us that Rockstar Bonnie was made from the original Bonnie, but I don't really like using cut content for my theories. However, this would place the creation of the Rockstars sometime after FNaF 2, or, well, most of them. While it is fair to assume that the main 4 Rockstars were built from their withered counterparts, Lefty doesn't actually have one of those. Don't bring up Shadow Freddy. Don't even think of Shadow Freddy. I'll find you if you do. You don't want me to find you. So Lefty's placement is a bit of an enigma there. He wasn't created from the withered animatronics directly. This means that it's entirely possible that Lefty was made slightly before the rest of the Rockstars, and might have been the inspiration for them. He also might have been made from whatever was left of Carney, an animatronic with a similar appearance that was there for Fall Fest, which predates FNaF 2 by about 4 years. It's impossible to say for sure. However, there is an undeniable chance that Lefty, in some way, shape, or form, was present at the time of the DCI. So, with all of that out of the way, what evidence do we have to suggest that Lefty is possessed by the 5 DCI kids? Well, take a closer look at this drawing of Lefty from the FNaF 6 office. If you do, you'll notice something. Lefty has 5 purple swirls around him. This already feels pretty massive, but as it turns out, the number 5 is literally everywhere with this animatronic. His name is made up of 5 acronyms. If you choose to buy him, he only costs $5. Or if you successfully salvage him, you earn $5,000 for it. In Ultimate Custom Night, he has 5 phases he goes through before his jump scare. And this isn't even all of it. Even the way he behaves gives off the impression that something is different about him. In FNaF 6, you can put Lefty up on stage, and if you do, he starts spazzing. Unlike, say, Rockstar Freddy, who makes simple and effective motions to mimic singing, Lefty's going absolutely haywire, twisting his torso, rapidly moving his head from side to side while opening and closing his mouth, and erratically shaking one of his arms. Compared to Freddy, he seems entirely out of control. And if that behavior isn't enough to convince you, then look no further than the very next game, Ultimate Custom Night, where Lefty is almost confirmed to be haunted. Take a listen to Lefty's voice real quick, and you'll immediately notice something.
Shh. It will all be over soon.
That is a female's voice. Specifically, this is the voice of a voice actress named Lena Gwendolyn Hill. Now, Lefty is a male animatronic, as is made clear by his in-game description. So then, why is he voiced by a female? Well, probably for the same reason that the puppet, another male animatronic, is also voiced by a female, because they're both haunted by female spirits. And just in case you're wondering, this is not the same voice actress that voices the puppet, despite being a part of Lefty. Now, compare Lefty's voice to the voices of the rest of the Rockstar animatronics. All 4 of them have voices and voice lines that fit their designs, because these animatronics aren't haunted. This is how they were made. But Lefty? Lefty has a distant, childlike voice that sounds haunting, and his voice lines don't fit the character in the slightest.
Shh. Come spend eternity inside with me. Shh. I'm so glad that I found you. Let me make room for you. Shh. There is room for one more.
Come spend eternity inside with me? Let me make room for you? There is room for one more? This isn't reading like an animatronic following its programming, not in the slightest. This is a spirit inhabiting a foreign object, and with the way they're talking about bringing you into him and making room for you, he's moving around the other spirits inside of him. And at the start of all of his voice lines, he makes a shushing sound, almost like he's trying to calm people down. Combine all of this together, and honestly, I think that there's a very solid case for Lefty to be possessed by multiple spirits. And considering that we still have one group of dead kids unaccounted for, with the MCI being taken up by Molten Freddy, I think that there's a very real argument to make that Lefty is possessed by all of the DCI kids. It even makes that ending more thematic. The lost souls of the DCI found the same peace that the lost souls of the MCI did. It actually fits together kinda perfectly. It's almost weird how much evidence there is for this. It started off almost as a joke when we first discovered this on stream, but as we kept going and going, more things started to pile up, and now we're here, at the end of the theory. I've laid out all of the evidence that I have. Is it speculative? Of course, it's a FNaF theory, it's always going to be speculative, but it's the best way that I can put together all of this evidence that has been waiting to be used for literal years. So, in conclusion, the DCI is real, and Can't Get Its story about the kind man at the 5 Orphan tells us that, following the DCI, Henry stitched the bodies together and accidentally created the oddball animatronic that we've never been able to fully wrap our heads around, Lefty. And that might be the craziest theory that I'll ever tell on this channel. Thanks for watching. None of this would have been possible without T-Dread, so make sure you go check him out. He recently uploaded a video where we talked about the other 2 Can't Get At stories, as well as a highlight video of the stream that we did, that's going up around the same time that this does. Until next time, make sure you like and subscribe to see when I come back. Take it easy.